We're putting down. We're taking down the statue of Columbus. In the Philippines, where Aisha is, they're taking down the statue of people who were heroes, actually, the indigenous heroes. Other way around.
They're doing what?
They're toppling down the statues.
Room for it.
Oh, that's a good one.
I can't deal with this right now, honey, because we're live.
Sam, you're okay there? Oh.
Yung wala kong sasabihin niya, ipinapanguna.
Hi all, thanks for joining. We will be starting in a little bit. We're just going to wait for folks to roll in, but we'll be watching a video first to just kick off the night, so hang tight.
Wow, it's great to reflect on our past performances here in Ginding Sindaw. Do you think it's too late for people to join us? I mean, we are in a pandemic right now, so
No, definitely not. I think, this pandemic doesn't stop us from dancing.
you're right. You know what, Vivian, you do have a point. So why not tell our viewers at home what it's like to be part of Ginding Sindaw?
So Kining Sindaw exists to assert, preserve, and reclaim and recreate the traditions of dance, music, martial arts, storytelling, and the orature of the indigenous people of Mindanao, who are part of the Southern Philippines.
And we share these art forms with the community to increase the social consciousness and awareness on issues that affect the indigenous peoples of Mindanao. We also hope to inspire the youth to take interest in the work that we do so that future generations can retain these things.
Right. And most recently, we had the Off-Way Broadway production show that you just saw. We also have performed with La Mama, who we are cross-streaming on tonight. And we've also done Queensboro Dance Festival, and we've also been live streaming not only with Rinayung, but also with a recent recital that we had.
Right. And we're still hosting dance classes every weekend using Zoom. They're free to join and they're an excellent way to build community. And the best part is, you don't have to be Filipino to join us. Anyone can come and be part of our family here.
Right. So what are you waiting for? Come over and join us today. I'm Vivian. I'm one of the co-hosts and moderator for tonight. And beside me, well, not beside me physically, but beside me, I have Jerome.
Hi, folks. My name is Jerome Valoria. I'm your second co-host of tonight's events. And we'd like to welcome you to Rinayung, Land is Life Part 2.
Right. Let me just bring everyone back to the PowerPoint. 1 second here.
Sure.
Okay. So for tonight's program, we have 4 speakers on tonight who will also be performing, chanting. And before we do all that, we are going to introduce who we are a little bit, throw in some guidelines, do some land acknowledgement. And then at the end, after everyone goes on, there will be a Q&A session or a discussion part that you can drop any comments in the chat and we can share at the end. And then afterwards, we'll just close the night with some announcements.
All
Good
right.
evening, everyone. My name is Putirang Kapanis Anonor. I'm the founder and artistic director of Kinding Sindaw, and this happened in 1992. And we are actually a resident of La Mama. And I would like to ring a bell The Culture of La Mama of Ellen Stewart. And tonight we're very thankful that we are actually presented by La Mama and live streamed. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that poetry. I just want to give a quick shout out and thank you to our funders here at Ginding Sindaw. So first and foremost, we have the Louisa Nicholas Lewis and Reginald F. Lewis Foundation. Of course, La Mama Experimental Theater Club, which is around the Lower East Side around by NYU on East 4th Street. Thank you so much for being there for us and providing all these resources. We would also like to give a shout out to New York City Council, Lotus Music and Dance, and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, or the DCA, Dance NYC, and New York Film Academy.
Now I wanted to do a land acknowledgement. I guess I will turn this over to John first.
Aspelia Biwa, and good evening to everyone. Just want to do a brief land acknowledgement here. Hello and welcome. My name is John Scott Richardson. As we welcome you to these lands, I would like to begin by acknowledging that this space and this performance is on an island known as Mannahatta, now called Manhattan, in Lenapehoking, the homeland of Lenape people. These lands are the intertribal trade lands and under the steward of many nations. Among them are the Abenaki, the Mohegan, the Mohican, Montauk's, Munsee, Nessequik, Rockaway, Setakot, Setlakot, Shinnecock, Taino, Onkachug, and Wappinger. We acknowledge the systematic erasure of many nations and recognize those that are still living amongst us. New York City is home to approximately over 125,000 intertribal Native American, First Nations, and Indigenous peoples, the largest out of any urban city across Turtle Island. Some have been born here with families' roots here in New York, and the areas surrounding the nations go back for many generations. Others have come to New York City to find what they could not find anywhere else, each one contributing to the rich and diverse culture that New York City has to offer and the urban Native community here today. We want to pay respect to all Native peoples, past, present, and future. Their continuing presence in the homeland throughout the indigenous diaspora. We offer our care and gratitude to the indigenous peoples of many nations who continue to act as stewards of the land to this day, and encourage you to learn more about these vibrant communities still living amongst us. Anishik.
Thank you so much for that. And then we'll also have Carolyn also say a few words. Oh, sorry, Carolyn, you're mute.
And I was just going to say, I thought Yokoke John Scott, my friend, for that land acknowledgement. I'm coming to you from Oklahoma, also known as Indian Territory, this evening. And the amazing thing about, one of the most powerful things about this pandemic is that we are able to come together from all over the world to be able to share this time together. Oklahoma, also known as Indian Territory, is home to 39 Native nations. Only 5 of those nations are actually indigenous to Oklahoma, and many of the rest of us were relocated from elsewhere by the federal government in order to make our homes here, and we have been here for many generations at this point. And I do want to acknowledge that I am coming to you from the Kickapoo Nation in that part of Oklahoma, and the original 5 tribes who are indigenous to this part of the world are the Osage, Caddo, Kiowa, Comanche, and Wichita, who currently their homelands now are just south of us. And we acknowledge them and thank them for their stewardship and for our ongoing yet contested stewardship of this area, and thank them and appreciate them and recognize all of us who now call this place Indian Territory home. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I do want to also mention some guidelines for this evening, or depending on where you're watching. If you're in the Philippines, hello, morning to you. So just a heads up that this event will be recorded because it's live streamed on Kinding Sindaw's Facebook page, and tonight we're also on La Mama's Facebook page. And when we go live, the event becomes recorded as well. So if you are uncomfortable showing your camera or anything like that, feel free to stop your video. Everything in the chat will be, just for us. Like I said, at the end, there is a Q&A and discussion part. So if you want to share anything in there, if you're not comfortable having that maybe shared in the event, feel free to either private message me or Jerome. And then everything else that is open to everyone, that's just going to be shared, I guess, to everyone, just so that, if there are questions that maybe you have that someone else have, it's not reiterated. And in addition to that, some of the topics that we might be talking about today, might trigger something in you. It's not in our intentions to do anything like that, but, it will be uncomfortable to talk about, just like even land acknowledgement right now, right? We have to realize that we're not on the land today if it wasn't captured and taken over. And those might be topics that are comfortable to us. But we're here to, talk about it and have a discussion and enlighten these things to everyone. So if there are something that is uncomfortable, feel free to, again, bring it up to either me or Jerome in the private message. And then if you have any questions, like I said, or any comments, the chat box in the Zoom as well as on Facebook will also be looked over by me and Jerome throughout the night. So feel free to share that with us if you have anything you would like to say. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to our first speaker, and Jerome will be introducing him.
All right, thank you so much, Vivian. So our first speaker of the night is Mr. John Scott Richardson. So John Scott Richardson is a member of the Haliwa Saponi tribe. His maternal lineage is Nansemond Tutelo Saponi, and paternal lineage is Meherin Tuscarora. So John is an accomplished native traditional singer, dancer, public speaker, and MC. He was taught Eastern woodland traditions, songs, art, and dances by his elders. As a traditional Native artist, John is a cultural advisor with the North Carolina Museum of History as a producer of music, powwows, and stage performances. Mr. Scott Richardson was program director for the North Carolina statewide youth advocacy program, the American Indian Commercial Tobacco Prevention. He has also been featured at the North Carolina Museum and North Carolina Arts Council in several historical features for American Indians in the Southern region. So without further ado, folks, I present to you Mr. John Scott Richardson.
You are Peleuk, everyone. Good evening. Glad to join you. I'm just going to first open up with a song in a traditional way. I like to do that to kind of bring everybody's minds and hearts together so we can have this conversation and there's good energy shared between us. So I'd like to bring everybody's heart in this drum, because this drum tells our story. This drum is the center of our nations and our communities here on Turtle Island. So I'd like to begin that right now. Where yo ha, eh, oh, ha, hey, oh, ha, where yo ha, hey, they da, ya, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, ha. Hey, la hu king ga yo hey yo hey asute se asani kaza sute hey hey ya Asute se asani kaza sute. Now, in that I had some words in that song, and that basically in that song it's a song of honor and is also a song of memorial, right? But that song we give thanks for this moment of coming together to share, and we give thanks for the Creator for being able to do what we're here doing today. This is monumental to be able to have these discussions and conversations about where we are now and looking back and maybe hopefully gaining some insight on how we can move forward better in the future as a collective human beings. And that's like to look at that word human beings, because that is what we all are here, right? We may have a few different customs and a few different dialects and way we speak, way we dress, but at the root of it all, we are all human beings. We are all placed here to be stewards of this place so that we may care for it, to leave it in a better way for future generations to come. Now, I don't know if we've all done that way it should have been done, but that's the intent. And we'd like to try to get back to that intent, right? And we look at the land is very important to us Native peoples, because we did not see the land as something that you own or something that you dominated, right? We worked with the land. The land taught us. The land taught us, and the things on the land, the plants, the animals, the trees, the seasons taught us how to live and how to live with it, right? Now, in various communities throughout Turtle Island, there are songs associated with just about every practice that is done, like planting. There are certain songs that you sing when there's time for planting. There are certain songs and things that you do for when there's a harvest. There's also certain songs for different individual ceremonies, such as prayer ceremonies or vision ceremonies or coming of age ceremonies. There are various times when we have these songs, and these songs are usually sung in the original language given to us by the Creator, so we could communicate with the things that we were here to take care of, right? So when you sing that prayer song to the plant, to the corn, that corn knows that song, the spirit of that corn, and it grows in a good way, right? But it also grows in a way to sustain and support the people that are connected to that corn. And this is how we live in a communal society, in community, and we understand these things. So that's why the land has been so important to us, not something to subjugate and dominate, but to live with, because we know that that land provides substance for us, right? Same with the waters, same with the trees, same with how we care for these things. So that was part of the colonial process, was to strip our contact and connection with the land, right? By removing that land base, it again interrupted our songs, it interrupted our prayer, it interrupted our connection, right? So that and that is part of the process, or was part of the process, to mitigate us or subjugate us, and then hopefully in turn convert or change us to where we no longer would have that connection. But our forefathers and ancestors fought hard to keep that, to keep as much of it as alive as possible. Some communities were hurt more. I know language is not something that's fluent in my community. Maybe my good friend Carolyn Dunn, it is more in their community. But these are all things that we struggle with and we have challenges with, because we know connected to that language and connected to that land is where the spirit lives. It's in our heart. We all have a spirit in us that connects us to where we learned our original teachings at, right? Every culture has an original origin of that spirit and where they learn to take care of the people. Now, things have been, changed, and the world is larger, technology is more involved now, right? But we have been accustomed to living in both worlds, right? We now can bridge over into the colonist world and go to school and learn education, but yet we still have our feet and our heart connected to our original teachings. And sometimes we might have to walk in 2 and 3, 4 different worlds, right? And to navigate this life that's around us now. But a lot of us still have that connection to our original teachings, or we have that source, or where that power, where we can go back and we can connect with that power, right? That's a special thing. And when you have that, no matter what policies or what presidencies or what governmental structures or principalities are out there, they cannot shake you when you have and know your connection to where you're from, and your prayers and your ceremonies and your songs, right? And so I encourage those that may not know and may be struggling and only have a piece of it. Go back wherever you're from, whether it's here or Ireland or wherever, go back and learn if you can, or talk to those elders that may be holding that knowledge, waiting for you to ask for it, right? I saw a quote today where it says, I'm always willing to share, but are you always willing to listen, right? So that's a two-way street there. And those elders are waiting. If they have some knowledge that they can pass on, they are waiting for that new set of eyes and ears to come and say, I want to know what it is. They're not going to just voluntarily give it to you, because they have to feel from you that you are going to care for that knowledge in a proper and respectful way. And these are the ways that have been taught to me and taught to us. And I just like to, thank everybody on this program, because, these are troubling times, and we are seeing history being repeated again. And we have to everyone has to now engage, right? And have a seat at the table. And we have to open those doors, because we are creating what our next 7 generations will be. We are now standing in our ancestors' 7th generation, right? So we're almost in the middle. And what we do now is directly a strong and direct impact on the future 7 generations. And Carolyn may talk about that a little bit more when she speaks, but I'm telling you, it is very important that the actions that you do now, you look at how they're going to affect those to come after us, right? Even with this planet and the times that we live in. Because, if the colonists could put a price on the air, which they have done probably in some places in the country, in the world, they're going to put price tags on just about everything, and all of these beautiful, abundant things that the Creator has placed here for us are for us to sustain our life, not to benefit from or profit from in a way of commercial capitalism, but to sustain us and to help us to be, just beautiful human beings that that we were created to become. So I don't want to I think that's pretty much, I can get long-winded, but I'm going to also share a beautiful song with you. This is a Iroquois water song that was gifted to me by a good friend named Dawn Avery, who has actually composed music for several plays that actually have been performed at La Mama, which one of them was a G-Jack on Turtle Island. And I want to sing this song as I close out my part of the presentation this evening, and hopefully get some good questions, and hopefully you stick around. But I'm going to sing this in the old style with my Iroquois rattle. Okay, here we go. Young way, Yawa got the Julio. 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 Yawa got ya hey ya. Young way, Yawa got the Julio. Young way, Yawa got the Julio. Ya got ya hey ya. Yahoo! Now, we also want to remember that this is American Indian Heritage Month, the month of November. But to American Indians, every month on planet Earth is American Indian Heritage Month, okay? And we have many Thanksgivings for various celebrations in our communities, not just the one that's been deemed the one Thanksgiving. We give thanks as part of our daily activity. We give thanks for various things. So thank you very much, Paleo Biwa, for your time. It's been a great time sharing with you and spending time with you. Thank you, Biwa.
All right, thank you so much for that, John. Like he mentioned, if there are any questions or comments you would like to, say, make sure to drop it in the chat. Now, I do want to turn it over to our next speaker. Her name is Samira. She's a Filipino journalist, environmentalist, women's advocate, and legislator. She served as a member of the Regional Legislative Assembly of the Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. And she's also a member of the Bangsamoro Transition Commission, which was tasked to draft the Bangsamoro Basic Law. She is the founder of Asian Peace Alliance, associated with Asia Pacific Peace Research Association. She writes for Asian Muslim Action Network and established Rinayung Rescue Team, a volunteer group who helps civilians displaced by the Battle of Marawi and offering relief missions to civilians. She currently lives in Marawi City and belongs to a Maranao ethnic group and has a follower of Islam. So I believe the floor is yours. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to open the slides that was sent over. And Samira, whenever you're ready, I guess you can start talking. Oh, we're not able to hear your audio. Give us 1 second here for some technical troubleshooting.
In the meantime, folks, if you're watching at home, feel free to share the Facebook live stream with your family and your friends. You can even start a watch party on them as well. And while we wait, I just want to echo everything that John had said in his portion of tonight's show. To the youth, no matter how young you are, it's very important for you to preserve the cultural traditions of your families, of your people. From my own experience, I can definitely say, going to a college that had a lot of Filipino students helped me get in touch with my culture. Growing up, I did not want to understand what it meant to be Filipino, but then I realized, my family is not going to be around forever. The elders will not be around forever. So it's very much critical to have those conversations with them. Ask them, what was it like during, World War II? What was it like during martial law? What was it like, when Corazon Aquino overthrew the Marcos regime? And then even asking things like, oh, how do you cook this? What are the dances you learned? How do I speak the language? How do I get better at it? These may seem like very simple questions, but they have a long lasting impact, especially for generations to come. So that's why we ask all of you at home, especially those who are around, the college student age. This is a good time to really reach out to your family and ask those questions, have those conversations. Definitely not an overnight thing. It's a process, it's a journey, and we are here with you every step of the way.
I think they're almost getting it. Hang tight. I think we can hear them now.
Is my volume okay?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you now.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. I'm so sorry.
No,
So
it's okay.
greetings from not Manila, but here in Mindanao, in Iligan City, 45 minutes away from Marawi, central Mindanao, to the northern part of our Mindanao homeland, southern part of the Philippine archipelago, 7,100 islands. If John had a greeting, I would also greet Mapia Kapipita. Mapia is good morning or good evening now there. Mapia Gabi. So maybe we can do that. Say Mapia Gabi. Mapia Kagabi. Okay, that's good evening in Maranao language or Maranao dialect. So one of the longest conflicts in the world is so-called the Bangsamoro conflict, and it's right here in the Philippines. And we have a rich history, of course, that the Bangsamoro, before colonization, were already existing here. So John's sharing of preservation of our memories is very much something that we aspire for, knowing and acknowledging that many of our memories and in photographs are with our colonial masters once upon a time in US libraries currently. So that's one of our things to do, is to reach out to the US archives and find out the Moro memories through its photographs. And it's unhealed, we call it, because there's just so much yet laws and regulations that were left by colonials, such as the US, that have impacted our living right now in almost in jeopardy, in helplessness, hopelessness. Next, please. So we are talking about the southern Philippines, and Mindanao is the island among three islands. Luzon is the north, Visayas is the center, Mindanao is the south, where one of the longest conflicts have existed. Moors were named from Moors of the Turks, the Crusades. They called our locals Moros. The Spanish called their counterparts, the rivals, the natives, Moros, because they were sword wielding and they were, scary to them. And this was 15th century, 1521, when the Spaniards arrived. And land is a very, very important issue, because right now, centuries later, 2020, the issue of Marawi and Central Mindanao, and with the Bangsamoro Muslim government in place, is really about how we as human beings can claim our titles or our ownerships back when colonial titles, colonial ways have encouraged the papering and the registry registry of titles when the natives have not registered them by paper. Many of the natives have not registered lands, and even among themselves as siblings and sisters and daughters, sons in one clan or cousins, they have competing claims because their elders died without leaving them the written memory or written order, written instruction. And so next, please. So it's a very technical issue that has, brought itself to fore. And what the conception of land for us as a psychological impact in a psychological way is that it's a very emotional issue. Land is something that is not just about bearing your name and birthright, but really is about you having a connectivity and a right and connection to where you are. And so that next, please, it's a, they felt that since they were there, living there, that they didn't need to title them. And they were also characteristically traders. And so even if they've left their land, they would still go back. So even if the diaspora of the indigenous peoples, the Bangsamoro peoples at that, were prevalent towards the northern part of our country from the south, because not just by the force of government having encouraged the migration of the northern part of our country to the south, but because the southern people had to also escape from not just poverty that came with the conflicts, they also had to trade as their natural being, so that they had to stay in other places and come back to a land that they supposedly own and they are connected with by birth. Next, please. So the Moros are one of the untold stories of the world, really. When I went to Oxford at one point, the library didn't have really much materials about them. One author only, even about in a Southeast Asian Oriental book. So the colonial experience, the colonial wars, the Spanish versus the Moors, the Moros, and the Americans also in the later part were really something of legends in the stories of our elders, of course. And this is something actually for even movies to even talk about, but it's really lost in memory because for one, we didn't have many documentarists among the indigenous people. We weren't writing about our so-called exploits or the counter wars, the wars that we did with the colonials. So that's one hidden or one shielded part of our Philippine history that goes to this day to the young people who don't know that we fought the biggest powers of the world, Spain, and later on America. Next, please. The policies, and that's what's sad, is that laws were put in place without indigenous people's participation. The Spain ceded to America the Philippine archipelago, including the south, without consulting the datus and the sultans and the leaders there. And the government actually encouraged the colonial government, and later on left that kind of legacy and action and policy towards its Filipino counterparts. Actually encouraged the taking, resettling, moving by the colonials, even their colonial subjects, from the north to the south. So we actually look at the comparison where a Filipino settler, a Christianized person who followed the Spain and the Spanish religion, can already own 16 hectares, whereas comparison to a Moro wild person who was also called wild because there was a creation of the American government, of a Bureau of Wild and Tribes, Bureau of the Non-Civilized and Wild. So they actually called the Moros and the natives wild people. And so we only had 8 hectares. So we have to battle this out correctively in the decades to come, in the wars to come. And the Philippine policy did say that this is the only solution. They would actually say that taking of lands is actually the solution to the peace problem, to the problem of the South. Next, please. And so comes the military powers, the military reservation. Most of the land actually in Marawi City, for example, 8,000 hectares was allocated for military reservation, to include even the Mindanao State University that offers free education to students. So it had to take one Philippine president to take an order, to make an order, congressional order at that, to have a law that would say that the Mindanao State University campus is exempt from the general law that there is military reservation. So there's a recent law 3 years ago or so, proposed bill actually by a Bangsamoro legislator from Maguindanao, Central Mindanao, to remove and to ask government to remove military reservation status to the Marawi lands. So this is just one example of a property or a land or this area where it was the laws and regulations and policies have geared towards us not owning our lands, waking up one day to find out that these are the laws that are existing. Despite that, we thought we have been titling our lands, some of us who are professionals and educated already, with government, to find out tomorrow that it's still really 1950s that are the order that is governing us, 1950s order that these are military reservations. Next, please. So that's the conflict right now in Marawi, in the Marawi rehabilitation. And surprisingly, one of the oldest cultures and one of the oldest peoples of the world, the Moro peoples, because of 6 centuries of existence, is actually the poorest part of the country. It's the poorest, it's the farthest, and it's the biggest. One of the highest numbers of fertility rates, if not the highest, is in this Muslim region. So very sad. And next, please. We actually see that they were majority, the Bangsamoro peoples were majority of Mindanao, to see in this next slides, and they become, the word very emotional, minoritized in their own homeland by force of laws and regulations. Next, please. Lumad is the indigenous peoples that were not Christianized. The Moros were the ones that mostly were Islamized. There are 13 of them, 13 ethno-linguistic groups. So people with cultures distinctly, they are all Muslims, but they are distinctly with different languages. And so can you see the whole graph of it from, does it show that from 1918, you see the movement, the diaspora, and the departure from being majority to being the minority in the 70s martial law period, and which is the another forceful period by the military and the government. So the authorities is shown to be working together to to put in policy and at the same time put in also the force because of the security sector. Next, please. So this, of course, Spanish construct, Spanish law carried on towards the colonial Americans is that concept by which all lands are public lands. All lands are public lands to include all that are existing, the trees, the mineral resources, the ore, metallic, and that in itself is a struggle of the indigenous peoples and the Bangsamoro peoples to find recognition, so that it had to fight for decades of government rebel wars to have a assertion that we weren't really consulted by this American Spanish law that ceded us to the Philippine Republic. Remember that we thought we weren't going to be even part of the Republic. That the U.S. had to court actually the the local datus because they actually tore their certificates of recognition by the Americans that they weren't really interested to be part of the Republic, called the document of the Dansalan Declaration, 1913, if that if I be corrected. So next, please. So can you see the systematic loss of lands by law, by law itself? And there's a rich number of slides there. I just showed a few, and I can share that with you. Thanks to the authors who were kind enough, also the researchers. So credit to them, like the Bangsamoro researchers who helped out in the Bangsamoro organic law drafting. This is the law that gave way to a peace settlement between Moro rebels and government. And so if there's a society that has been in lockdown, beyond 7 months, it's Marawi's ground zero residents who have not been able to move back to their original location, which was the site of the bombing of Marawi 2017 because of a warrant from government, because of a warrant led by the FBI of searching a certain individual called Hapilon, and that's the US connection there, that you were looking for this terrorist target, Hapilon of Basilan, and you were looking for him in Marawi. And what ensued is a fight because Hapilon resisted. And so this impact, searching for one, but displacing a million, almost a million people of our countrymen who are still not back in their homelands, at least the 200,000 of them who are in different parts of the Philippines, even begging because they're no longer as traders as vibrant in the past. Barter trading in the Philippines is not encouraged anymore. And we're a trading community. The Bangsamoro people are traders. The Maranaos are traders. They're vendors. They're selling and selling things. So next, please. So all the support that you have given us through the Kinding Network goes to actually this evacuees, this multiply displaced people, always in time, having to escape conflict, having to escape clan fights, having to escape government military, rebel fighting, and so-called terrorist fighting to this day, which is happening, of course, with an anti-terror bill in place. So the operation's still going on. And of course, the climate change impact of being the number 3 climate change risk country all over the world, the Philippines. And these are Muslim evacuees, Moro evacuees, who have gone back to different parts of the country, now in Cagayan Valley. This is Cagayan Valley, the northern part of our country, which is very vulnerable. We're actually happy in the south, in the Marawi, that we're actually insular and we're not as typhoon impacted, typhoon damaged, but the business is too low, investment is too low. The stereotype of the Moro, the Moors being the scary part, scary people that they are. So the investment hasn't been as rich. That's why we're one of the poorest parts of our country. So this is the face of it, multiply evacuated and multiply impacted throughout this journey of having the largest typhoon impact of this year, now Olysis, and facing another 3 typhoons to come in this year. Next, please. So it's a life of uncertainty. There are no government laws on displaced persons. Even if there's a Bangsamoro government in place, it is not with jurisdiction, budget allocation for this transition period. It's a transition period, and therefore it's not able to even fund programs outside the Bangsamoro region, when sadly and ironically, there are more Bangsamoro because of diaspora than within the Bangsamoro homeland of 2 million people, 3 million people. There are 6 million, 7 million, and still I am tentative with the numbers because of the lack of registry, again, as natives, as Bangsamoro peoples, as indigenous peoples who have believed that they are part of this homeland. They are not registering. Many are not registering because of, not without the culture of documentation. They don't have that kind of appreciation of being registered. And my grandmother would actually say, I don't want to be Christianized, and so I don't want to go to this school of the Philippines. And so that kind of attitude maybe has gone to our younger generation. So these are last 2 slides. I might go over time for our next speaker. So thank you again. Thank you. We are vendors. We are vendors. We are vendors outside Bangsamoro. We are in public markets all over the country. So all the support that networks give in terms of donations actually go to evacuees who are recuperating and recovering, and also those within Marawi. More specifically, your support goes to the Marawi recovery for those who have not yet even gone back to ground zero. So can you imagine the support that has gone a long way to help the longest quarantined people, longest lockdown people? Next, please. So thank you very much to Kinding again, and congratulations to this forum. I am grateful. I think I have a last sentence there, that even if we are, without language to engage the government, we haven't had many native lawyers defending native lands. Many are not. If there are lawyers, we are not into the land reform, land defense. Next, the last slide. But as this saying goes, the last slide, we may be small, we may be driftwoods, but beware, for everyone will trip over a driftwood. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much for that. That was a really, great way to learn a little bit more, or actually a lot more about the history. So thank you so much for that.
All right, and again, daghang salamat gyud, Samira. Thank you so much. I know Lil Bisaya for now. Now I'd like to turn over to our next speaker in the lineup, who is Miss Aisha Mariano. Just a little background for her. She's an Indigenous youth from the Cordillera region of the Philippines, which is up in the north. She started her volunteer work for Indigenous youth since she was an undergrad, and she has joined a cultural group called Dapayan de Cultura de Cordillera, or the DKK, which translates to the People Center for Cordillera Culture, and that way to enrich her cultural knowledge. It opened her eyes on the true issues of Indigenous peoples in her region in the form of songs, theater, and dances. After finishing college, she decided to become a full-time staff for the Cordillera Youth Center, or the CYC. It's a youth organization that provides a platform and venue for youth in the city, such as educational discussions, workshops, and trainings, and self-belongingness among Indigenous youth. Afterwards, she became the program coordinator of the Asia Young Indigenous Peoples Network, which is now, used to be called the Asia Young Indigenous Peoples Youth Network. Now she is the network administrator for said organization. In addition, she is also the Deputy Secretary General of the Cordillera Peoples Alliance, or the CPA. Without further ado, folks, let's give a warm welcome to Miss Aisha Mariano.
Naimbag nga agsapayo amin. Good morning, everyone. So before I start, I'd like to greet my co-speakers, Ms. Samira, Professor Caroline, and Mr. John, and also thanking Kinding Sindaw and La Mama for this opportunity to share with you the Cordillera situation. But before I start, I would like to offer a song. It's a kulilipan. A kulilipan is a traditional Tingyan tune from the province of Abra. The song is entitled Siak ni Kaigorotan, or I Am Kaigorotan, which was composed by the Dapayan de Cultura de Cordillera Salidumay group, and I'll just be singing parts of it. And the lyrics speaks of Kaigorotan being free, strong, and resilient people of the Cordillera. Siak ni Kaigorotan, tao ada tinagan, saan laeng apabuya, wenno may saayayam. Di pagkaistoryaan, puli kaigorotan, awanan sarday sa lakniban, dagaan nagtaudan. Kulip si kulilipan, kulip si kulipanan, kulip si kulilipan, kulip si kulipanan. So thank you. To start, Let me give you a short description of our organization. Oh, sorry. So the Cordillera People's Alliance is an independent federation of progressive indigenous peoples organizations. We were established in June 1984 by indigenous leaders and activists in opposition to the World Bank-funded Chicodam project. There are at most 300 member organizations across the Cordillera region, and our agenda mainly is for the recognition of the Cordillera indigenous peoples' ancestral domain, establishment of a genuine Cordillera Autonomous Region, and the promotion, of course, of national democracy. So the Cordillera region is found on the northern part of the Philippines in the Luzon Island. We have six provinces. We have there Apayao, Abra, Kalinga, Mountain Province, Ifugao, and Benguet. In terms of its land and people, the Cordillera region is a mountainous terrain. We are populated by 1.7 million people, majority of which are indigenous peoples, collectively known as Igorots. So there are 7 major ethno-linguistic groups and also other ethno-linguistic groups. So the first picture there is the famous tattoo artist Wang Od, Kalinga. And then the second on top is indigenous peoples from Mountain Province, the Kankanai Bontok, and then the Isnag of Apayao. The lower part, the first picture is the Kankanai Ibaloy of the Benguet, to which I belong to, and then the Ifugao and the Tingyan of the Abra. So the main source of livelihood here in the Cordillera region is subsistence agriculture. Besides being a mountainous terrain, we are also the watershed cradle of northern Luzon. And the Cordillera region has the richest in terms of its natural resources. So it has huge mineral deposits, 25% of the world's countries reserve, forests and fertile soils. We are the source of the highland vegetables here in the Philippines. And then it has also abundant water sources and high geothermal reserves. So despite this richness in terms of natural resources in water and in mountains, the Cordillera region's natural resources are being grabbed. So we experience what we call this development aggression, or the imposition of destructive projects in indigenous people's territories. And these are in the form of mining, energy, logging, and agricultural liberalization. So the indigenous peoples are known for its fierce resistance against large-scale mining and dump projects that threaten the lands, environment, and the people. But this defense of their ancestral rights has been met with brute force and repression by the state and private corporation. Thus, there is now the increasing human rights violations against indigenous peoples' human rights defenders. So I'll be showing you a map which was collaborated among the networks of the Cordillera People's Alliance, and it shows now that the region is blanketed with more than 100 large-scale mining applications and more than 100 hydropower and geothermal projects awarded to private corporations. So the yellow ones that you see there are the mining tenements and also the different dam projects. And if you'll notice, where there are mining applications or dam projects, there is now the militarization that is happening in these provinces. So one such project, energy project, is the Chevron geothermal power project covering more than 25,000 hectares in Kalinga province. And if left unchallenged and unopposed, all this could mean ethnocide for the Igorots and massive destruction in the ecosystems of the Cordillera. So until this day, militarization of communities is a marked trend in areas where there are active and organized opposition to mining and energy application, human rights violations against defenders of the environment, ancestral lands, and resources and human rights have escalated even during the COVID-19 pandemic. So here we see a monument that was built in April 2017 by the CPA and the families of Pedro Dungok, the one on your left, Makling Dulag, the one in the middle, and Ama Lumbayagayudan, among others, in which CPA took inspiration from They opposed the then World Bank funded Chico Dam in the 1980s of the Marcos regime. And as they know that the dam would cause destruction to the ancestral land, drowning of communities along the Chico River in Kalinga and Mountain Province, and displacement of the indigenous peoples from their own land. As they know, destruction of land is destruction of life, culture, and identity. However, this year, the police, army, and the other government agencies plan to take down this monument, allegedly because it enroaches the road right of way. But this is an example of historical revisionism. So as indigenous peoples organizations on the ground and sorry. So here, another cases of indigenous peoples' human rights violations are the illegal arrest, the killing, and the illegal detention of our indigenous human rights leaders. The one on top is Ricardo Mayumi. He was leading the opposition of a Quad River mini hydro dam of a Santa Clara Power Corporation. He was shot dead in 2018. The one on bottom is the 5 women human rights defender. They have trumped up charges, or they were falsely accused of murder, frustrated murder, and one of which is my mother. So my mother was illegally detained for almost a year because she was in one with the community in the opposition of these destructive projects. She is a community health worker. She has been providing health services to the communities to which the government could not bring. So she was detained for almost a year, and at least she's free now, and that case was already dismissed. And our most recent case here in the Cordillera is Betty Belen. So she is an indigenous women human rights defender in Kalinga. She was one in leading the opposition of the Chevron geothermal project in Kalinga. In last month, they allegedly found grenades at her home, to which led to her detention. So as a grandmother, as a mother, as an auntie, as a sister, Auntie Belen believes that protecting the land is the protection of our future generation. So we call for her freedom, because she is still illegally detained as of the moment. So as indigenous peoples organizations on the ground and organizations continue to lobby, engage, and protest against the destruction of our ancestral land, we need your help. So we need your help in amplifying the voices of our indigenous peoples. Be one in us, hopefully, in our continuing defense of our ancestral land, culture, and people. So as you can see in this slide, we have this campaign, the Defend Cordillera PH, which brings unity in the goal of strengthening global solidarity to defend the Cordillera against plunder and state terror. So you may see this on Facebook, and it has a website and an ongoing petition in terms of the demolition of the monument that I have just mentioned a while back. So as part of this presentation, let me share to you a translation of the words of the Pangat Makliing Dulag, an elder leader, and here it goes. You ask if we own the land, and mock us, saying, "Where is your title?" When we ask the meaning of your words, you answer with taunting arrogance. Where are the documents to prove that you own the land? Titles, documents, proof of ownership? Such arrogance to speak of owning the land when we instead are owned by it. How can you own that which will outlive you? Only the race owns the land because the race lives forever. Makliing Dulag. As to formally end my presentation, I would like to present a video, an ugayam of a respected leader and activist, Marcos Bangit, who was extrajudicially killed in 2006. So what you will be hearing is an ugayam, or an indigenous chant, that was dedicated to one of our indigenous leaders, Daniel Ngayaan. It tells the story of how foreign corporations introduced aggressive projects to our ancestral lands and the opposition to it by indigenous peoples, led by the likes of Daniel Ngayaan. It told the narrative of how they were branded as terrorists and were eventually killed while advancing people's welfare. He then likened ngayaan in his ugayam to a plant to which trampled upon. If it is buried to the land, it will for sure bloom 1,000-fold. So I hope you guys could help us in our campaign, and would love to hear the questions later. Thank you. Oh, sorry. If Vivian or Jerome could play the video. Thank you. Sorry.
No worries, I can pull it up for folks.
All right, thanks, Jerome.
Yep, no problem. Let me just mute myself.
Ayo gayam di gayaman, iyak iyok og gayaman, nabak ng akapadasan. Ni amadan niya ngayaan kan daddo maabanwar titignayan. Napingit anang ilaban panang salak nagti dagaan agtawidan. Ayo gayam, programa kan proyekto, limlintag amang limlimo, ngay may inyo lugti gobyerno na turid kay anang sango ng supyat ng idaulo. Nga isuti makagapo nga inda kay intudo kunada-ada kay ket terorismo. Ay ugayam, gapo inting kay pa nagserbi, nang ilaban interest ti umili daytoy ket sumupadi linlenteg ipagpag na ti FP. Nga isuket timbaga daget dakay nga ket rebelde. Ay ugayam. ay ugaya pagsayaatan ti kaadwan tiin kay nga indaldalan tiin kay nga inwanwanwan nga isut ti makagapwan ta inda ng pukawan biyagyo nga nakapimpiman ay ugayam di gayaman arigit may sa apagay binagdakan dakat nalaylay narekreket maidiso daga nga inkay nga tinartari pato sigurado nga agtubo sabong naket nalang to agbo nga ket ni ribo ay ugayam magayaman ay ugayam di gayaman ay ugayam nasibugan ay tidarang
All right. Thank you so much for that video, Isa. Very powerful and very moving. And I'll turn it over to Viv.
So we do have one last speaker for tonight. Thank you for bearing with us for some technical delays. But next we have Professor Carolyn Dunn. She is a poet, playwright, and scholar who was born in Southern California and is of Cherokee, Muskogee Creek, Seminole, Cajun French, Creole, and Tunica Biloxi descent. Her scholarly work focuses on American Indian women's literature and American Indian identity. She has taught at Humboldt State University, Four Winds Indian School, and California Polytech State University. She is a founding director of the American Indian Theater Collective. She is also a member of the female Native American drum group called the Man Killers. She is the director of the American Indian Resource Center at UC Santa Cruz. And I will turn the stage over to her.
Thank you, Vivian. What I want to do is start with a gathering song. And this was a song, it's in the Choctaw language, and the words are, look at all the beautiful people dancing. That's what it means. And we use it as a gathering song. And it was made by myself and my former partner. And we still sing it. So that's, that's okay. Way, hey, So gotta scoot back in. You know, it's so funny when we're working and having our activities, you know, in our homes. It's kind of funny how we have to move things around and kind of and get situated. So I'm welcoming you to my home, and my background is the Milky Way because we believe that that's where we came from, and that's where we will return to. Thank you, Vivian, for that beautiful introduction. And I just want to say that that's a little old. that bio is a little bit older. I was the managing director and the director of the American Indian Resource Center at UC Santa Cruz. And I left there in 2014 And now I am at Cal State Los Angeles. I am in the Department of Theater and Dance, and I teach playwriting. And so I've always had careers in higher education and in teaching and administration. And anyhow, so I just wanted to say that, because there is a wonderful director of that program, Dr. Rosser, who is there now, and she's been there for quite some time. So I want to open up with a song and say, Halito at Chugma. My name is Carolyn Dunn. I am very honored to be here. I thank Kinding Sindaw for inviting us to participate and be with you here. And there's so many, in the presentations, so many similarities between what happens in the United States and then what happens in other parts of the world with American blessings, in a sense. And I first became aware of what was going on politically in the Philippines when I read a book called Facing West when I was in college. And that was a very long time ago that I was in college. I'm old. And just so you know, the professor of that class, he just turned 75. And I was amazed at that. So that just kind of tells you how old we are. And I think people posted that publicly on Facebook. So I'm not, letting anybody know something that you're not supposed to, that David turned 75. But so the book was written in the early 1980s, and it detailed what we now call settler colonialism. We now have a framework to be able to talk about these issues, and what Drennan was talking about at that time was settler colonialism, as it really was rooted in its origins in American imperialism and in American colonialism. And the definition that we have now of settler colonialism is that it is the replacement of an existing population by a foreign population through land settlement and land claim and land grabs. There are different types of settler colonialism. There is different aspects to it. There's forced, assimilation through force, which is what happened in the United States and in Canada with the boarding school system. And all of the systems that we have in place now in Indian America or Native America were put in place by the federal government to assimilate us into from indigenous ways into the colonial power ways. And so there's different forms of settler colonialism. There's the actual physical act of it, when people actually move to the land and sit on the land and take it over. Therefore, enacting laws that justify their settling of a space, and enacting laws that justify the use of force against the indigenous peoples. And the peoples who are currently in a space. And so in listening to the earlier presentations, it just really, it hit home to me. I'm originally from California, but my ancestors were from Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Mississippi. And I now live in Oklahoma in the Kickapoo Nation. And we're reminded, and I said a little bit earlier, that in the land acknowledgement, that in Oklahoma we have 39 federally recognized tribes that call Oklahoma home, but only 5 of them originally were lived. This was their indigenous land base, their homeland. And they most of them are just kind of to the south of us now. I live near Oklahoma City. And those nations still exist. And there's also a Caddos in Texas, Caddos in Louisiana. So this area was heavily populated by many indigenous peoples. And when the government came in the 1830s and under Andrew Jackson and said, okay, it's time for the so-called 5 civilized tribes, the Creeks, Cherokees, Choctaws, Seminole, and Chickasaws, to be forcibly removed from our ancestral homelands, which are now in current day Mississippi, North Carolina, Tennessee, those areas, Alabama, parts of Alabama, and forcibly removed on what's known as the Trail of Tears, and forced the nations physically at gunpoint to move in the middle of winter. And many people died on that journey. And we remember that, we remember that journey today. And so, again, just thinking about how there's so many similarities between what the federal government was doing here against Indigenous peoples in Canada, what their government was doing, and Australia and New Zealand, what their governments, were doing, all came out of this English idea. And it goes back to the Magna Carta, and it goes back to the Pope's doctrine of discovery. And, I know we've had many conversations about this before too, but the doctrine of discovery is what gave Magna Carta, then the doctrine of discovery is what gave the Western powers the so-called God-given right to be able to go somewhere, settle it, get rid of the indigenous peoples, and forcibly remove them to somewhere else. And we see, from the earlier presentations, from Aisha's presentation and Samira's, that this continues and continued in the Philippines. And so we see a lot of similarities between what happened in our cultures by this colonial, based in a Western European model. And what I wanted to talk about tonight is, is the idea that we are all Indigenous people under this yoke of settler colonialism. And something that I heard on the radio today, and I want to talk about also what the Ojibwe scholar Gerald Wiesner calls survivance. He wrote, he's a theorist, he's incredibly dense. I love him to death. But reading his work takes a couple, you have to read it a few times to really understand what he's talking about. And so he talks about that there are different modes of survivance by Indigenous peoples, specifically within the US. That's who he's talking about. And he says that there is survivance against colonization, and not just survival, but survivance, which is actually living, thriving, continuing on. And that is what he's talking about. So he's talking about survivance against colonialism and actually living the authentic life, living the life in the sense that you know your language, you know your culture, you know your land base, you know your people, you know where you come from. There's that. And then thriving in that, and thriving in your traditions, and thriving in your language, and thriving in your religion. And then there's also survivance against what he calls Indian, with a little I instead of a capitalized I. And he talks about, the small I Indian, which is the image of the American Indian that is replicated through popular culture. So not only do we have to survive against this colonial power that still exists and is still colonizing and attempting to colonize us, but we also have to resist and resist the image and the many times romanticized image that non-Indian people have of us. And, we see it all over and over again in films, in TV, in so many movies that are out there that sort of reify this narrative that American Indian people died off a long time ago, that American Indian people don't exist anymore and were completely assimilated or subsumed into the larger culture. And we know that that's not true. And I come up against this narrative so many times in the work that I do, especially at the university level. The university is an institution, and it is an extension, therefore, of the colonial practice against us. And it's also become very much a site of resistance for so many Native people, who simply exist in that space. and exist where we aren't supposed to, theoretically. And so getting back to this idea about survival and this ongoing colonization that is waged against us, and it's in so many subtle ways. You know, I mentioned earlier, I'm a playwright and a poet, an actor and a director and a professor, and I tend to really talk about issues in contemporary Native America and issues that are going on in our world right now. And one of them is the idea that we do still exist, but we exist in spaces that we're not supposed to be in. So the university is not necessarily a space that, you know, that Native folks are supposed to be in, you know, according to that settler colonial mind frame. But yet the ways in which we persist and the ways that we practice survivance, excuse me, is oftentimes through songs that, you know, that John Scott had mentioned, through language that my friend John Scott also talked about. And the scary thing is that when you think about it, you know, we are literally one generation away from losing languages that have existed since time immemorial. You know, I myself, you know, learned my ancestral languages, Choctaw, some Muskogee Creek, Creole French, you know, these languages that our ancestors, you know, directly the ones who I knew, my grandparents, didn't speak because they wanted us to assimilate. They wanted us to be Americanized. And that was a way that they survived. And that was a way that they practiced their survivance. And the fact that we now are experiencing, and in this time period of language revitalization, where communities are bringing languages back from the brink of extinction, is also a practice of survivance. And this also shows that we have been able to survive, and our languages very close to extinction still, but are still being spoken more and more in our communities. They're spoken through our songs, they're spoken through our ceremonies, they're spoken through all of our rituals, they're spoken when we talk to people outside, when we share our languages with one another. And that's so important to be able to continue those practices and those ceremonial practices. And so many people have gone and taken these ceremonial practices from the brink of extinction, along with language, and brought it back to the community, in which the communities are relearning. And there's generations of people who that is their only language that they've known. And so there's so much richness and so much survivance that's going on in the world right now. And so we're, you know, that it's a very exciting time. And one other thing that I wanted to talk about was the idea that, you know, I was listening to the radio today, and I'm a news junkie. I listen to CNN, you know, all the time. I have it on, I watch it, it's just on in the background. Thank you, John Scott. It's just on, you know, like I said, just kind of on in the background. And they, you know, they had a doctor on today, and she was saying that, you know, I know folks are upset, and I know everybody wants to go have Thanksgiving with their families and do this, but we can't. And I know people are tired of all of this. And, you know, I'm like, I'm not, you know, because we survived worse than this. We survived this. We survived pandemics. You know, we are the survival of the smallpox generations, of pandemics that were brought into indigenous communities as part of the settler colonial practice to eradicate us. But yet we're still here, and we still are surviving, and we still are singing our songs, speaking our languages, existing in our land base. We may not always get along with each other. You know, there's a lot, because we have learned lateral violence. That's another aspect of settler colonialism, lateral violence within our communities, and that exists also. But there's so much more that we need to celebrate. And we also, and I wanted to hopefully open this up to the rest of the panelists, in which we talk about everyone's saying that, you know, talk about the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. That was Freudian. The United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, in which the UN has said Indigenous peoples have the right to exist and the right to practice their cultures, the right to speak their languages, the right to live on their land base, the right to control their own, politically control their own space and their own people. But which the United States is one of the only countries that has not ratified or not signed on to that, because the United States recognizes that if it does sign that declaration or approve that declaration, and I know I'm using the wrong language for it, that they will have to extend that all of that to Indigenous peoples, and not have so much to say about how Indigenous peoples live our lives. You know, there's the idea of, you know, sovereignty as a concept, and sovereignty is you know, remember they asked George Bush, what is sovereignty? You know, or when he was President George Bush, the younger George Bush, and he said, well, sovereignty is sovereignty, because he couldn't even understand what sovereignty was. But sovereignty, when it comes to Indigenous peoples, the federal government set us up as a nation to nation relationship. But yet we are sovereign yet dependent nations. And think about that for a minute. What does it mean to be sovereign yet dependent upon someone else? That was created for us, not by us. And the concept of sovereignty is, you know, and many people will argue with me about this, but sovereignty, I don't think, is an Indigenous concept. It's not indigenous to the American Indian people in the United States. As it's framed now, our sovereignty is inherent, and it's inherent in our being, in the ability to practice the ceremonies, the songs, speak the language, have this relationship with the land, and be able to carry our generations forward into, as John Scott said, into the next 7 generations. Something that I've always said that reminds me of the concept of moving forward into the next 7 generations, and what we do now affects our 7 generations. And John Scott said earlier this evening that we are the 7th generation for our ancestors. And I always say this, and then I was watching a good friend of mine was doing a talk the other night, and she said the same thing. And it reminded me of how we are Indigenous people and how we move forward in the world, and how we learn from our past, and we are in the present, and we also are looking to the future. And if you think about it, when you look at the stars, so you go outside, look at the stars, those are the same stars that our ancestors saw. And the stars, you know, how light travels. And if we look up at the stars and realize those are the same stars that our ancestors saw, and were around during that time when they were there, and how that ties us back to our previous generations and ties us to our ancestors. So that's why I put up my Milky Way background, because I see the ancestors, and I know that they are there, and I know that they are waiting for our return. And the idea also that that when we think about what our ancestors survived, what we're going through now, we are practicing survivance in the here and now, and teaching our future generations about survivance and how to survive. We have a playbook for it. We know how to get through this. We've been through a pandemic before, and we know how to do this, and we know how to survive. But everybody else just needs to understand that we have Indigenous knowledges, we have ancestral knowledges that teach us to survive and that teach us to get through so we can continue to live and teach the next generation and the next generation and the next generation and so on. And so I want to close, if it's okay, Vivian, if I have enough time, to close with a song, and then I think we're going to open up to open up to Q&A. But this song was a song that was given to me by a very dear friend. She was grandma in the Indian way to my children, and she passed about a year ago now, and now I am able to sing the song because it's been a year, and we didn't sing it for a year for that reason, because of her passing and to honor her. And some folks out there may recognize it. It's an old women's honoring song. Okay, thank you, Messi Mado, for asking for my participation and for bringing this, bringing us all together this evening. Thank you. I have learned so much, and I appreciate being able to share with you in this space.
All right, thank you so much, Carolyn, and thank you to all four of our guest speakers tonight. And thank you again for bearing with some of our technical difficulties. Now, I would like to open the floor for any potential questions viewers here on Zoom or viewers at home on Facebook may have for our guests tonight. I'll also be double checking the comment thread.
I just want to acknowledge that one of our board of director, Sindaw, is here, Antonio Del Rosario. Thank you for joining. And also one of our indigenous people from the Aranon tribe, Sidik Ampanas, is also here.
I do have a question.
Yes.
Thanks for putting this together, and thank you, Dr. Dunn, for your work. My question is to you. That the song you shared was very moving. One of the things that concerns me the most with indigenous people all over the world, but right now here in the United States with the pandemic, because they're disproportionately affected. Even I know poetry and many of um, of the Filipino community are nurses. 4% make up the nurses in the country, and 31.5% died. It's huge disproportion, and I know that in North Dakota, South Dakota, and all over the country, indigenous people of our land are also disproportionately affected, and it seems like it's the same thing that happened 400, 500 years ago, 300 years ago. I mean, it is they go into the communities and infect them, and they trade, and it's like, I know it's not consciously done now with the smallpox blankets,
Right.
but the not having the hospitals, not having the healthcare that our white counterparts have, it seems still intentional. And I know it's not. I know there's no malice or anything nefarious about it, but and I hear you in terms of, yes, many of indigenous people have gone through this before, but shouldn't we be concerned? It feels like it's genocide all over again, and not having the resources, that the equity that needs to be. I mean, there's restitution, there's restoration, there's reparation. I mean, a lot of things needs to be done, but right now, our people are dying.
Yeah.
It's just another blow, and I'm just overwhelmed with so much that is going on, as if it's not enough. And particularly the indigenous people in the United States, since they don't have power in terms of voting, in terms of they're not part of the, oh, we're going to campaign towards the indigenous people because we want their votes. They're forgotten.
Yeah.
And how do we get in front of the world and go, hey, we're appealing to your humanity?
Well, I think, thank you, Antonio. Those are good points to bring up. John Scott and I lost a very dear brother of ours. I'm going to get emotional, to COVID. I lost my niece to COVID. And so many other people. A dear friend of mine, a board member for our theater company, passed away from COVID. I mean, so, and when you think about, I can count on two hands, honestly, how many indigenous people I've known that have passed from it, and that and didn't have to, and that is what angers me the most. I mean, and we do have a playbook. We know, we've been through this before. We know how to survive this, but it doesn't mean that we know how. Because I remember asking my nephew, my niece's brother, I said, what's going on? This is in our ancestral homeland in the Mississippi Choctaw Reservation near Choctaw, Mississippi. And which, interestingly enough, I live in Choctaw, Oklahoma, but because there's the Choctaw Nation is in Oklahoma, and the Mississippi Choctaw Band of Indians is in Mississippi. And there are other Choctaws too in Louisiana, but I digress. And I asked him, I said, what's happening there? Why is this just running rampant? And I know that our healthcare there has always been substandard. My brother-in-law won a case against the hospital there because they gave him the wrong medication. I mean, it's just, and it's just sort of ongoing, there, and part of, being the state of Mississippi. And our tribe has economic development. It's, we have, we're able to put money back into the, into healthcare. But the healthcare is still substandard because it's Mississippi. And I don't mean to say that and be trite in that way, but it is. And if you look at other healthcare systems in Mississippi, there's also a lot of can't even think of the word, not, and it's not disparate. See, again, English professor who can't even remember words. Where the healthcare is not equal. There's no equity there, like what you had mentioned. And then, again, earlier, listening to the news and hearing that the Navajo Nation is closing down again, because the Navajo Nation has been also disproportionately affected by the COVID pandemic. And a lot of what's going on, because they don't have, and they're so spread out, and there's not a lot of running water there. So there are different reasons why it's kind of running rampant in different indigenous nations. And just because we've been through this before, and I said we do know how to survive it, but at the same time, we also have to learn to not go visiting our relatives and visiting family members. We have to put some of these protocols into place, and some of these protocols are not really, we're used to getting together. We're used to spending time together. We're used to being in large family groups. We're used to, working in schools. The schools were closed, and my niece was a cook in the cafeteria at the school, and that's how she caught it, we think, somewhere at the school. Even though they weren't in school, they were still feeding the kids, and the kids would still come and get their breakfast and their lunch. So we do know how to survive a pandemic. We've been through this before, but we also need to understand that these are different times. This is a different era, and what we've become so accustomed to in how we deal with our friends and family. We do need to follow those guidelines, and we do need to wear masks. And once that started happening in Mississippi, it slowed down quite a bit. It has slowed down quite a bit. I mean, there were days where, there were, and we created this a Facebook page, to talk about those who had passed. And it was like every day there were at least 10 people passing in the community every day during the early part of the pandemic, well into the summer, until people started masking, started socially distancing, and then it slowed down quite a bit. And so I think we need to follow the guidelines still, and just and know that eventually this will pass. But it is, like you were saying, Antonio, it is really. Okay, so how come you guys didn't tell me that my microphone wasn't on this whole time?
No. Your microphone was on just now.
It was just for 2 seconds.
Oh, okay, good. Because I was like, I'm talking, and I'm like, all of a sudden, my microphone. I think I tapped it by accident. Anyway, so
we can connect your experience right now with what is going on in the Philippines, like in the height of this COVID. And as a frontliner and epidemiology, I'm so sad because this might go up to 2025. But like on the top of COVID, there is militarization, and there is this flood and typhoon. So this is like, we can go back to Samira. How can we help? How can we help what's going on now in the Philippines?
Yeah, I wanted to say first to Antonio that, if the West in colonial history was teaching us, maybe the developing world, the world at now, would listen to indigenous peoples and the natives on how they self-medicated, on how they healed by themselves. Many are not in hospitals. They would not go to ERs. They would not get checkups from the village doctors or medical staff. They just self-medicated, drank leaves, drank from what's available, herbal medicine. And in one material here that I read on Philippine medical history, that we did as one point in time in colonial times, had the cures, the many herbal medicines, the many cures for toxin or for poison. So this COVID is actually teaching us to get back to our native ways, our native roots as a humanity, and no longer dividing us as a West or the East. And so that our bayanihan, or what we call solidarity amongst ourselves, is really manifest in how you've helped us in this times of crisis. Kinding and its network, the U.S. network, was there for us in the Marawi siege, able to give dollars to our young people and elderly senior citizens, and now the typhoon victims who are in need of cover for their tents, no, for their sleeping quarters, clothings for malongs in a way that they can cover themselves. Kumots, we call it the wraparound, for warmth, things like that are being collected. And Mindanao is now helping the northern part. When the north was helping the south, it's now the south that is called upon to help the north. And really, I was inspired by that question because I I got it that I practiced it myself. I didn't want to go to the hospital, and I had to ask all my elders, my native root, my native expert consultants on how I would cure my any that I felt, health wise. So self medicating is an internal lesson that I got, and so that it's really east and west now co-sharing knowledge, co-sharing medical relief, and yeah, it's a wonderful time really to reflect on these exchanges.
It's also, I think, a great thing that Kinding Sindaw is doing to unite indigenous people from our country in the Philippines and our country here in the United States. I really appreciate that, Ms. Gutok and Dr. Dunn. The big thing that I'm just concerned with is it just I'm going to go back to it. It just feels like it, and it's the same experience. The colonization of the Philippines, the colonization of the United States, the stealing of the land from the indigenous people from here in the United States by the Europeans, and the Europeans again in the Philippines, and the marginalization, the continuous marginalization. I saw what you wrote, Dr. John, in the chat, because like in the Philippines, and I appreciate what you just said, Ms. Gutok. Like in the Philippines, we are not used to, our genetics are not made
Yeah.
for all of this crap, and the home remedies, Ms. Gutok, that you were bringing up. I mean, when we're exposed to this horrible sugar, Filipinos are dying of diabetes all over, and so are indigenous people here in uh, in the United States. But I think this is a great start of unification of indigenous people from all over the world to say, I'm going to just say it. I think we need to ask, indigenous people need to demand reparations, and to say, this was this is our land, and to go, give us the hospitals, give us the education, give us all these things, because you're continually killing us. It is genocide. It's de facto genocide, I think, and I think we need to put a lot of light on it. Otherwise, we will continually lose language, culture. Uh, but I go on my soapbox, but I really want to hear more from you, Ms. From the indigenous people of the Philippines, and from here in the United States, about
Wonderful.
how we can unite more and make alliances.
That's wonderful, Antonio. It's really the reparation dream and reparation documentation that has denied our holo, burning victims of 1970s martial law, the demand for reparation. So the 1970s martial law victims were actually not able to secure any claims from government, many of them because of the lack of documentation that government wanted. And so how can we as professionals, as those who can speak up for them, also ask that non-written is also as valued as written testimony, as non-written testimony. Written testimony is as valuable as non-written testimony. Oral is also as valuable as verbal, as written. So that is one way also we can help uh, help cement, affirm the value of indigenous people's voice, knowing that they cannot have the necessary support. Many are not lawyers, predominantly not lawyers, not legally speaking, not even speaking the mainstream language. And so the solidarity and the support system, the response and the action has to be set up. Thank you for that.
All right. I do want to wrap it up because we are, getting close to 9 p.m. now, or not sure what time it is in the Philippines, but I do want to have a couple of announcements. And before everyone leaves, I do want to take us like a photo screenshot because that's the only way we can take a group picture in Zoom. But as we have mentioned, there is a lot of things that we do need to do. And these are just some links for us to move forward. We've gotten a lot of information today, but we do need to take steps to actually, solve some of these issues. Next 2 weeks from now, we will have part 3. And there is a part 4 following up as well. So I do encourage everyone to come back to join, gather more perspective from different speakers. We also do have weekly weekend classes for dance where you can, take initiative to learn cultural aspects through, movement. You can either scan that QR or I'll also have, the link in the video once it's uploaded on our site. All this information will, be in the caption as well. But like I said, I do want to wrap it up. I think this night has been, very informative. Definitely do encourage the discussion to, continue off screen as well. Before I do let everyone go, like I said, I do want to take the picture. So if you are comfortable, you can start video. And when everyone's ready, I'll just say 1, 2, 3 and do the screenshot. All right, give me 1 second. All right, if
I would like
everyone...
to opportunity right now to say thank you very much for all the guest speaker. You are not a guest, you're part of the Kinding Sindaw family. We're trying to create this platform so eventually, hopefully, we can create a network supporting each other.
All right, so if everyone's ready, I will redo that again. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. All right, thank you, everyone. If you have any other questions, feel free to, message us and comment as well. And have a good night. Thank you for being here.
Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you, everyone.
And we will do the salutation of Kinding Sindaw in honor of our ancestors who created and transmitted this tradition to us. With open hearts, we'd like to take them in mind, body, and soul. And with humility, we bow as you use it to empower us as we walk our path. Thank you very much. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and see our website. We need each other. Thank you. Be safe. I love you very much. Wear your mask, please.